All right, welcome everybody to the third Catholic Creatives Podcasting Workshop. I am your host, Kyle Heimann from Mac Studios at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. And if you haven't checked out the past workshops/meetups, and I do want this to be a meetup where we have conversations about podcasting and questions that you have or ideas that you have, suggest those in the comments. Let's make this a conversation and not just a lecture or whatever. So, first one, we kind of talked about, first of all, we went through like a overall of all the different topics that we could cover in workshops like this, but also really focusing on, what did we focus on? What's a success for you? Like, is this a hobby and you're just like doing this for fun, like playing basketball in your driveway, or are you planning on being in the NBA? Big spectrum of how much work you need to put in if you're expecting different levels of success, whatever you deem success. And then we kind of had a bunch of different tips in that first episode. So it's a good kind of overview one. If you missed that, go back and check it out. The second one we did last week was on budget and being realistic on your expectations of how much time and money that it's going to take to podcast if you want to attract a decent sized audience. And then today, I think this might be the most important episode, because it's going to set us up for the future episodes and the future workshops that we do. So today we're talking about really what your show is going to do and why you think we need your podcast. In fact, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Feel free to make comments in the comments. For some reason, I can't see comments when I'm live here. So hopefully you can comment on each other's. I'll jump in the comments as soon as this is over as well. So we have got, let me switch my mouse. All right. Today we're talking about passion and purpose. Why do we need your podcast? So what hole is this filling in the universe? Like, this image may be a little hokey, but the idea of that lock needs that key. There's a hole that's just right for that key, and it fits that space. So why do we need your podcast in this world? There are 4.1 million podcasts out there, and it's growing every day. Why do we need another one? So it's kind of like a Simon Sinek, start with why, and really gets into what purpose does this serve? So first category, if you will, would be like your passion, your skill set, your talents. Second category. Okay. The second category would be the need. What is the need for this podcast? Why do you think the world needs it? Who needs it? The third would be the promise, and how are you going to deliver on that? So those are kind of three broad categories that I've broken down into more steps here. So some of these might be obvious and things that you've, of course, thought about. Maybe some of them you haven't thought about, and maybe there's some overlap as well between them. But why are you making the podcast? What is your passion? Like, if you're not passionate about it, I don't know that it's going to be great if it's not something that you're really passionate about. Stephen Bartlett does Diary of a CEO. It's a huge, very popular podcast. He said that he realized that he cannot pick guests and topics based off of what the audience is looking for, needing, or wanting. Just because something did really well does not mean he should repeat that. What's most important to the show is that he's genuinely interested in the person that he's having on the show and the topic. If he's not genuinely interested, that comes out in the show. Because if you watch it, he's just very curious and very involved in the conversation and has really smart questions. And I don't think it would be the same if it was something that he didn't really care about or wasn't really genuinely curious about. The next would be, what gap does it fill? So how are you filling some void in the universe, especially in the podcasting space? What question does it answer? And not every podcast would necessarily answer a question, but maybe what problem does it solve? So some of these you can just kind of pick which one fits your scenario best, or maybe you want to kind of tweak it as well. How will the listener change after listening to the podcast? How will their lives be different? And what's your promise or guarantee to the listener? And then at the end, we apply this to every single episode. So I put these actually in a worksheet format that somebody could sit down and you could spend some time just filling this out, working on it. So I'll provide this as a PDF or a Google Doc or however people want to consume this. I'll put it in the notes or the comments for this episode. But basically, the purpose of your show, and I'm sorry, this is small especially if you're on the phone, but I'll give you the worksheet. But why are you making it? What is your passion? And again, you might not be able to answer all of these, but at least 2 or 3 of these 4, hopefully you could answer. And I'd be curious if anybody has suggestions on questions that aren't here that would be applicable to either your situation or even generally to a wider audience. But why are you making it? What is your passion? So why do you think that you're the right person for this podcast? What's your expertise level? What's your secret sauce? Like why would somebody listen to your version of this topic instead of somebody else's? The second one would be, what is the gap that you see? So what question is it answering? What problem does it help solve? So if there are 300 podcasts and for example, if you're saying like, I have this idea for a podcast and as a Catholic guy talking to Catholic guys about Catholic things, I could probably name hundreds of shows, literally, this is not an exaggeration, hundreds of shows that are Catholic person talking to Catholic person about Catholic things. Like we don't really need another one of those. So what's different about what you're proposing? What's different about your thing? Is there a gap? And I think 2 really good examples of this are, and I've mentioned them before, is Wallet Win does a Catholic Money show. There's not really anybody else. There's been a couple short-lived things that I've seen in the past, but like there's nobody that's really doing what they're doing of educating people on good financial principles from a Catholic perspective and keeping ethics in mind with how you're dealing with debt and investing and even just like in spending and discernment and all that. Another one is Better Preach with Ryan O'Hara. And I hope he doesn't mind. I had him fill out some of these. I want to share some of his answers. I meant to text him and ask if he minds. I don't think he'll mind. All right. So what is the gap you see? What question is it answering or what problem does this solve? So just fill this in there. Like, I see this problem and this podcast would be the solution to it. How will the listener change after listening? How will he or she be different after listening to the podcast? So it could just be that they were entertained, like it brightened their day. It made them happier than they were before the podcast. That is a good thing. Entertainment is a good, positive thing. It might be that they learned something in every episode. It might be that they're challenged in some way. So how is their life going to be different and better after listening to your podcast than it was before? The last one here is, what is your promise? Can you make a guarantee to the listener? Like, I promise you that this is going to happen. I guarantee you that if you listen to any episode, that something's going to happen, or you're going to get something, or you're going to learn something, or you're going to be challenged to do something, or you're going to be empowered or inspired in something. Be specific here. Once you have these things, this is really going to help us moving forward as we talk about the ideal listener avatar, your 10-word description, a longer description, your artwork, and all of this is going to feed into this why, your purpose of your show. So you should be able to apply all of this to it. Okay. So I asked Ryan O'Hara to fill this out. And if you're not familiar with this podcast, it's called Better Preach. And he talks with different Catholic speakers and priests about giving homilies, in the case of priests usually, and then public speaking as well. So whether it be, giving a talk at a retreat or leading at a conference or whatever, what are some tips and tricks that you can learn from people that are doing this professionally or or at least doing a good job of it? So when I asked him, why are you making it? What's your passion? He talks about the renewal. He wants to see a renewal of preaching in the Catholic Church and help develop and deliver great Catholic talks, help people to have the skills that they need for it. Great. And it's something he's very passionate about, and he's a speaker himself. So I think one thing that he could add into this is like his desire to learn as well. Like, and when we are along with him on that journey of learning, we learn as he learns. So he kind of puts himself in the seat of the audience member as well. What gap do you see? What questions is it answering? He says there's a low confidence that many church workers have, including some clergy, in their ability to teach or preach effectively. So this is interesting because I didn't walk him through this before. He just let him take a stab at it himself. And he interpreted this as like the gap in our world, gap in our church. He sees that there's a lack of resources, especially free resources, to train somebody, to mentor somebody into being a Catholic speaker or giving better homilies or leading retreats, things like that. I think another step in this is, okay, then why podcast? Well, because there's a gap in the podcast space of podcast listeners. There's not this kind of material. And I'm going to get to a bonus page 2 of this workshop in a little bit that kind of addresses that. But yeah, where's the gap that you see in your niche, your genre, your area of specialty? Like, what is the gap that your podcast is going to fill? How will the listener change after listening? He says they'll be inspired, equipped, and more confident in their call and ability to effectively teach and preach the Catholic faith. So I love this, that if you listen to an episode, you're going to be inspired and equipped to be a better Catholic speaker. And so then every episode needs to deliver on that. If this is what you're saying, hey, listener, I'm telling you this kind of gets into the next one, the promise, right? But I promise you that you're going to be more equipped and you're going to be a better Catholic speaker if you apply the principles in these episodes. And every episode of his does that, whether it be him and a guest or him solo or him with Connor Flanagan as kind of occasional co-host. They're always giving you ideas of how to prepare better, how to give better talks, tips, tricks, learn from my mistakes kind of thing. And so it is doing that. And then the final question, what is your promise? Again, there's always overlap in a lot of these. And I'd be curious if you have different questions that you think fit these better, put them in the comments. But his promise is that he is going to stay focused and that there'll be expert interviews, there's practical training, and in-depth reviews of key texts in homiletics, evangelization, and catechesis. Again, this is a little bit different than I meant when writing it, so it's kind of interesting to see how he took it. He's promising what he's going to be delivering. I think another thing is, what are you promising that they're going to get out of it? Which it kind of talks about that, that you're going to get these expert interviews and stuff. But I think also, like, I can promise you that if you listen to these episodes, you're going to have takeaways. You're going to have ways that you can improve your speaking techniques and prep for speaking, specifically with a Catholic perspective. All right. So again, I have this worksheet. If you want it, I'll put it in the comments here. If for some reason you're seeing this somewhere else down the road, it's on YouTube and the comments aren't there, you can always send me a message on Facebook or send me an email, send something through Mac Studios, and I'll get you a copy of this. But just a really quick, easy way. Feel free to change anything. Like I'll give you the Google Docs so you could change the questions to fit your situation. But again, like, let us know. Or if you want to like fill this out and post it in the Facebook group to get some feedback, this would be a great way for us to just kind of work together as a community and support each other, and hopefully help people be more intentional. Excuse me. Okay. Now, I mentioned a bonus page because I think another thing to think about, especially whenever we think about what is the gap, is what is the competition. And I put competition in quotes. And again, sorry, this is small, especially if you're on a small screen. But this will be page 2 of that worksheet. And this isn't necessarily the topic today, but I also didn't think it was like worthy of an entire workshop. But thinking about what your competition is, and I put competition in quotes, like I said, because competition, we can see it as a negative, right? Like that we're competing for listeners. And, there are 4.1 million podcasts out there with, by the way, many podcast episodes per podcast. So it's not like there's 4.1 million episodes. There's, I don't know, hundreds of millions of episodes, maybe. So why are they going to listen to yours when you have this competition out there and they can only listen to one, not the other, at least at a time or with a limited amount of time? Couple things. One is you could be providing a different service than your competition. And in which case, it'd be great to work together. Like this person is doing a parenting show for toddlers, and I do a parenting show for teenagers, right? Like there may be some overlap there where I have children that are both toddlers and teenagers, and I would want to listen to both. It might have two different audiences as well. But what a great opportunity for them to collaborate and work together and say, hey, if you're looking for this other show, if you have toddlers at home, check out the toddler show. If you have teenagers at home, check out the teenager show. To work together, if you have two different kind of lanes within the same topic. The other thing is just different perspectives and things like that. It could really be cross-promotional, but it could also be collaborative, be guests on each other's shows and things like that. So not to think of competition as, oh, we have to defeat the competition, but how could we raise each other up? But if somebody is doing the same thing in your space and doing it well, then you might want to think of a different angle or a different topic or something like that. So this is really basic. It doesn't even require a worksheet, but it asks with the podcast title, what is similar about the podcast, and then what is different about your podcast. And if you find a popular podcast that is similar to yours and you can't figure out what's different or the difference is not that significant, then again, I'd probably either not do the podcast or try to find some different area. Like, could you be a co-host with that podcaster? Like, can you work together and just make that podcast even better? Is there a need for your version of that podcast? Okay, so again, I didn't ask Ryan's permission to share this, but hope you don't mind, Ryan. He had two. So there's three spots on there, but really he only has two things that are similar and that could be potential competition. So one is Preach, which is from American Media, and they really focus on, I underlined it red here, it's exclusively interviews with priests on homiletics, and it gives a sample homily. So it's very specific to homilies for priests. A lot of Ryan's shows do talk with priests about homilies, but that's not the entirety of the show. And it's very much also geared towards lay people that are giving talks. Even when it is a priest talking about homiletics, there's some takeaways for lay people as well. All right, the other one he had was Art of Teaching, which he said it's similar subject matter. They're preaching, focusing on the art of science of preaching and equipping, but it comes from a Protestant perspective, which I think still, if they were both about giving talks, like Protestant and Catholic, there's probably, the theology would be different, but the actual giving the talks probably wouldn't be that different. I think one of the big differences is it's three hosts and no interviews. So it's really just the perspective of those three people, where Ryan's getting such a diversity of guests on a show that you're getting men and women and priests and sisters and lay people and youth ministers and, national speakers that do it full time and people that are doing it as a hobby or as part of their ministry job at a parish. So getting that variety just really gives a lot more takeaways from different perspectives and different things to think about. So I think his show is very different from these two shows, and there is a need for this, especially in the Catholic Church. And so kudos, Ryan, for everything that you're doing. So again, I'll put the link for the document in the comments. I'll probably do like a PDF and a Google Doc. If you want me to share a Google Doc with you, just send me a DM with your Google account and I can do that however you want it best. Or if you want it saved as a Word document or whatever, I can do all that. But again, thinking about intentionality of why the world needs your podcast and does it, and being honest with yourself, like, is there a market for this? Is there a need for it? Is there a gap that this is filling? Can I promise to stay on this particular theme for a significant amount of time? I'll give you another example of people that I think are doing this really well. Is there's a podcast called Springs in the Desert, and I haven't listened to it in quite a while, but it's some folks who got together and realized there's this need for all these couples that are struggling with infertility to and sometimes it's hard to talk about, either like people don't understand or like you don't know any other couples that are struggling with this. And so, and like every situation might be different. Like there's different situations, like some adopt and some don't. And they put together this podcast, Springs in the Desert, and it's a whole ministry and doing cool stuff. So if this is something you're interested in, check it out. But you can hear from other couples that are going through a similar situation and how they're dealing with it. And it makes you feel like you're not alone, right? So they see a need. Nobody else is doing anything like this. And it's building community and serving a community that isn't being served well in most of our churches and dioceses. And from the podcast, people are getting inspired to form ministries in their parishes and dioceses. And so there's a lot of fruits that come from that. So really just seeing like, is there a need for this? And even if it's like, there's 100 people that need this and it's only going to get 100 downloads per episode, but those 100 people need this kind of support. Great, do it. You know, like if you're able to and you're willing to, and that gets back to the first episode, what is a success, right? Is it just getting 30 people that need to hear your message? That's great. But then like staying consistent. Consistency in release schedule is important. Like people can expect to come it out how often, with the ideal being weekly. Consistency in length is semi-important. I mean, if it's 3 minutes one week and 3 hours the next week, it's kind of hard for people to know what to expect and to really get locked into a routine. You know, if it's 20 to 40 minutes or whatever, like having some kind of consistency between where the length is semi-important. Being consistent in your content and your topic and your theme and that promise and your why, I think that is the most important thing. That if Springs in the Desert suddenly did an episode on preaching, like, okay, well, how does it apply to these couples struggling with infertility? You know, and it could, but like being intentional about like, okay, let's not alienate the purpose of the show just because we have this opportunity to talk with somebody about something. You know, and if Ryan had on a guest host to talk about finances, like had the Catholic Money Show folks, Walt went on to talk about finances. Well, that wouldn't really make sense unless it was within the context of as a speaker. You know, how do you figure out what you should charge? And so like there could be some things that relate to speaking, but you wouldn't want to do something that's just completely off brand and out of your why. So consistency in your release schedules, consistency in the length, and consistency in the themes, topics, the why, the promise from episode to episode. And if you make that sheet, was back here a couple, right? This one here, you fill this out and keep this as a reference so that every time you plan an episode, am I doing these things? Am I making content that is doing what I promised it would do, that is serving the community I said it would serve? And again, this is going to help form us as we take, which next week is going to be the ideal listener avatar. So kind of taking what we've been building so far, this all happens sequentially, will help us to create that ideal listener avatar that we're not talking to everybody. We're not even talking to a group of people. We're talking to one person. That person has a name. That person has an identity. and we fleshed that out. So that's what we'll talk about next week. If you don't want to wait until next week, there's a book you can check out called Make Noise by Eric Newsom. And I don't know why it's $19 for a paperback. I don't remember it being this expensive years ago whenever we went through this. Maybe it was. Used, it's about $7. I listened to it on Audible. And so it's really good. And two of the main takeaways that we've used on pretty much every podcast that we've launched is the ideal listener avatar, the 10-word description. So we'll talk about those in the next couple of weeks. But you can check out the book. You can check out articles, interviews. Eric Newsom's been a guest on other podcasts. If you want to check it out and get a jump start on that, or you don't want to wait, or you just want like more information about it, it's really cool. So again, this Make Noise by Eric Newsom, a creator's guide to podcasting and great audio storytelling. Okay. So if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, if you have any ideas, you think any of this doesn't apply to your podcast, or you have a better idea on how to plan some of this stuff out, or you want to run your answers to some of these questions about your podcast or the one you're starting, or like all of this stuff. I know we're kind of, this is geared towards a new podcaster that's creating something from scratch, but all of these are good for us to go back to if we've been doing a podcast for 3 months or 3 years, to say like, okay, what is the purpose behind all this? What is the why, the promise that I'm making to the listener, and have I been delivering on that? If you look at your past 20 episodes and you're like, actually, I was kind of all over the place as far as like topics, themes, target audience, whatever, maybe look at how can we make it more consistent? How can we serve a specific community? The one thing I like, and I think actually all three of those examples, Better Preach, the Catholic Money Show, Springs in the Desert, they all do this one thing well. And it's that you might not be the best of one thing, and you might not be the best of this other thing, but could you be the best of the two of those together? Right. So like Ryan might not be the best Catholic podcast. Father Mike Schmidt's Bible in a Year probably wins that pretty easily as far as popularity goes. And it might not be the best public speaking podcast. There might be some really good secular public speaking podcasts out there that are working with people that are, charging $50,000 per engagement or whatever. Like, and they've got some really good content in there. But I do believe it's the best Catholic podcast about public speaking. The Catholic Money Show might not be the best finance show. It might not be the best Catholic podcast, but I do think it's the best Catholic podcast about finance. Springs in the Desert. There might be other infertility shows out there. I don't know. And there's certainly other Catholic podcasts, but this is the best podcast for Catholics struggling with infertility. So kind of thinking that as a life hack of like, or not a life hack, but what is your shtick? What makes your podcast different? Like how is it set apart from anything else? And if your description kind of could fit with 1,000 other podcasts, you probably have a problem. Also, I've got a puppet show here. If anybody wants us to do a puppet show as part of a workshop, let me know. I have no ideas on how to work puppets into podcasts. You know what? I was actually thinking though, I wonder if anybody has taken an audio only podcast and played it back with a live puppet show to make it into a video that you could post on YouTube. Because I think that could maybe be a thing. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Look forward to your conversations. Also, feel free. The CC Podcasters is the group on Facebook. If you're seeing this somewhere else, we're going to be posting this on YouTube and stuff. So if you're seeing this somewhere else, join the CC Podcasters, Catholic Creatives Podcasters group on Facebook and submit your questions. It's not a place to promote your podcast, so don't be like, hey, a new episode just came out, check it out. But if you're like, hey, could anybody give me some feedback on this? I feel like that doesn't sound that great, but I don't know how to fix it. Or what do you guys think of my podcast artwork? It seems a little messy. Whenever I shrink it down, I can't read it. Any tips or suggestions or whatever. Like, feel free to ask questions there. Feel free to give advice. Just it's not a place to promote things, but let's build up the community, help each other out, support each other, promote each other's stuff, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody. Oh, and invite somebody else to check this out too. If you think somebody else should be in this group or should check out this episode, do it. Also, I should also say, uh, all of this was geared towards podcasting, but kind of relates to anything. Like if you have a YouTube channel, social media, stuff like that, like this is kind of just basic marketing, planning, brainstorming, uh, being intentional about creating stuff, artwork in any form. Peace.